Hey, Mama. Welcome back to the Mom Walk Collective podcast. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Ari, and we are two moms just trying to navigate through motherhood. But today we are three. We have Elizabeth with us. She is our Denver, Colorado ambassador. She's also a licensed professional counselor, and she is doing a 5-part series on perinatal mood disorders. And so this is part 3 of a 5-part series. But Elizabeth, can you intro yourself before we dive into the topic today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Elizabeth Wellington. I am the Denver ambassador for the Mom Walk, and I'm a mom to a toddler who will be 2 in July. And I'm also a psychotherapist, and I specialize in moms and perinatal mental health. And so I'm excited to continue our discussion on this important topic.
Yeah, if you guys haven't listened to the previous ones, oh my gosh, are they so good? Me and Ari can even just say every time we sit down with Elizabeth, we're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, just the freedom that's coming from the conversations. And so we highly recommend going back after you listen to this one, go listen to the other two. We also now require it for our new ambassadors to also do a training that Elizabeth had done for all those who host our cities. It's just been really great. But today we're really excited. We're jumping into the topic of different mood disorders that may happen around the topic of breastfeeding, whether it's around anxiety or depression, and just the struggles that may come with that whole journey. We know, we also just want to preface to, like, we are pro fed baby. So if you chose to formula off the get-go and didn't breastfeed a day in your life, we are so backing you and for you. This one we just thought would be a really great subject topic because there is a lot of conversations that aren't talked about it. And so, Elizabeth, if you can kind of start us off of like, what do you hear most? What
Mm.
if you have a personal journey, or if there's something that like you want to kind of go into the conversation of, okay, the moms who do choose to try to breastfeed, what are really common things that you're hearing from a specialist point of view?
Yes, such a good question. So I think both personally and with the women that I work with, breastfeeding seems like the ultimate indicator of your like mom worthiness.
Mm.
That's what it feels like, I think, to so many women that I work with, where it's like if you have struggles, if you don't like it, if you don't like pumping, it feels like it's so wrapped up in our value as a mom. It's so personal and often unexpected to have challenges. It's like we really don't hear about it. So like moms start, trying this journey of breastfeeding, and there's like the latching issue and the supply. There's oversupply, there's undersupply. There's like so many issues that we just never
Tongue
even heard
tie.
of. Yeah, right. So I think a lot of what I hear is it feels like an indicator of if I'm doing a good job or if I'm a good mom, and not
Mm.
realizing the extent to which breastfeeding is so intertwined with mental health in so
Mm.
many directions. No
Mm.
one talks about this. No one talks about it.
No, I think what's even too really interesting is if you don't have like another mother figure in your life, you are dependent
Mm,
on whoever is the nurse on duty at the
yeah,
hospital or at the center or your midwife to, in the 2 days that you're in recovery under care, quote unquote, to teach you how to do this.
totally.
And I don't know about you guys, but like when I got pregnant and like first your boobs start to hurt and then you're like, "Oh my gosh, I have big boobs." And like then colostrum
Yeah,
starts and you're like, "What the
yeah.
heck? I didn't know." Like you're
What
always
is
curious
this?
like,
Yeah.
"How is my boob going to produce this?" And then you have the baby and then still you're only producing colostrum, and then it's the weight of
Yeah.
like everyone talks about like your milk coming in, and then all of a sudden if your milk comes in, then it's like, oh my gosh, there I got these jugs on my chest, like they're up to my chin.
Right.
And then two, after that, people talk about like a letdown. And, there's so many things that you just don't know, especially as a first time
Right.
mom when
Yes.
it comes to breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And I think, can we like start the conversation of um just even starting with tools in the tool belt around a mindset behind breastfeeding from being pregnant? Like, what are some
Mhm.
things that we can talk
Yeah.
about in the beginning of what are pros and cons, even
Yeah.
before your
Great.
child is born, to go into thought processes and mindsets behind
Yes.
breastfeeding?
I love that question. So this is what I think I really want to get across today, which is that no matter how you feed your baby, the idea that breast is best is one way to look at the issue. And it's one
Mm.
way that has sort of gotten this like cultural stamp of approval, but it's not the whole story. It's not the whole
Mm,
story. And so the pressure that we feel, that so many of us do feel, that breast is best, and the pressure that some of us feel with the nurses in the hospital who just like put the baby on the boob and just like expect it to work and for you to be, it doesn't need to be the case. So I feel like I'm relieving the pressure. Like, let's relieve the
mm,
pressure right now, because the research is so mixed about breastfeeding. What we do know, this is what we know. I'll tell you just what the research says. Breastfed moms, or breastfeeding moms, when it's going well, it's good for mental health. So when
Mm.
breastfeeding is going well, it actually improves mental health,
mm.
because breastfeeding is anti-inflammatory, which is so
Mm.
Whoa.
fascinating, right? So breastfeeding actually has an anti-inflammatory effect in the body and in the breast. So lowering inflammation in the body actually helps to relieve the stress response and can
Yeah.
help with depression. So isn't that miraculous? I mean, it's just incredible that that is the case. So breastfeeding is good when it's going well. But when it's going bad, it's bad for mental health, right? And so depression, if you're depressed, it suppresses the hormones that are responsible for lactation, which is oxytocin
Wow.
and prolactin. So depression
Mm.
suppresses the hormones that you need to breastfeed successfully. And
Mm.
the research also shows that when breastfeeding is going poorly, that impacts mental health and can really lead to depression. So it's very complicated. It's a murky thing. So it's not quite as clear as breast is best, because if you are depressed, breast is not best.
Mm.
Mm.
It's not going to work. And so
It
that's
almost creates
basically, yes,
it almost creates like a negative feedback loop is kind
that's
of what
right.
I'm taking. Is
Totally.
like if the mom is depressed, then she's not going to be able to produce the milk that she would if she wanted to like fully breastfeed. So it's almost like you have to tackle the mental health prior to then like approaching breastfeeding.
Yeah.
I mean, you may be able to do it in tandem. Maybe that's like
Yeah.
a possibility, but the stress and the pressure, the societal pressure, the internal pressure, all of that is not setting you up success to breastfeed.
Totally. That's totally right. Yeah. And depression, the rates of depression and postpartum tend to be higher among women who stopped breastfeeding early because they were having problems. So,
Mm.
like you said, it is a negative feedback loop when it's not going well,
Mm.
which, isn't really talked about. So we have this idea, I just have to do it and push through, and, it's the best thing for my baby. But like, well, what's the best thing for the whole family, including you? Because what's best for
Mm-hmm.
you is also best for the baby. But also, like, the research is mixed on what's best for the baby. Like, it actually doesn't say the long-term effects cognitively and health-wise about feeding in the baby is not so clear that breast is best. So it's so much more murky than what it's sort of made out to be, or what it feels like, I think, in society when we talk about it.
So interesting. I don't want to go deep into it, but just want to touch on, you talked about it's an anti-inflammatory. And right now I'm like weaning Lincoln. So he's a year old, or he's almost like 13 months, and I have stopped breastfeeding him during the day. So the only time he feeds is right before bed. And then if he wakes up during the night, I'll like nurse him in the night or whatever. But I've literally been telling my mom this of like, either I'm gaining weight or I'm just super bloated or whatever. And I've been feeling negative about my body the past few weeks.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, something's going on. I was like, I don't know what's going on. And we even had this conversation. She's like, it must be your hormones, especially since you're weaning and everything. She's like, that's what we need to look into. But what's crazy is the connection between me weaning him and my mental health have been so hand in hand. Where these last few things, I was like, I have been, the body dysmorphia talk in my head has been like, oh my gosh, like you're so bloated and that doesn't look the same and that doesn't, all that type of stuff, which is like then putting me in this, like, I've had to essentially really train my brain to be like, no, that's a lie. You just had a baby a year ago. Like there's studies, I think you mentioned even in an episode that it's like 7 years postpartum type of deal that your body's still like going through transition. So it's just really, that whole anti-inflammatory thing is really fascinating. And I think it might be freeing to a lot of people who like are stopping the breastfeeding journey and now are in that mental health thing of like, oh, my kid's not dependent on me anymore. And my body's changing again because I used to have boobs and now they're just lumpy sacks. And, you know?
Oh my gosh, Jamie, yes, you're right. Weaning is such a journey. I mean, weaning is a journey unto itself. It's like one mini journey in the larger breastfeeding journey. You're so right. And also, no one talks about it. I was so unwell when I was weaning. I really was. I'm like laughing about it now because I'm looking back on it, but I was such a roller coaster of hormonal and just messiness. I was so fatigued, I couldn't move, and it took me so long to figure out it had to do with the hormonal fluctuations resulting from weaning.
Wow.
It was such a wild ride. So it's similar to your, it was so hard. So hard.
Literally no one talks about this. Like I'm almost thinking like, was this all aligned when like Harley started to like wean herself off? I still breastfeed Graham like for comfort, but I'm like, oh my gosh, was like I didn't think about the hormones that would come into effect after I'm weaning, you know? Right now, I'm just like a weird person. I have one boob that produces milk for him and one boob that's like, I've retired.
I'm out. I'm out.
Oh my gosh, if you guys would have seen me today, my boobs were so lopsided because he was with his dad all day, but last night he like seemed, I guess, to have favored one side. So I literally was like flat chested on my left side and freaking a boobalicious on my right. And it's like noticeably different where I'm like, I literally wore a sports bra to like just compact it all and squish it all down. But
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so funny.
So funny.
But I would love for you to kind of, I guess, dig into just what would be an indicator for a mom who maybe is struggling with a breastfeeding journey, or maybe Ari, you can even give an example of like having twins and your milk coming in late or something, and like what would be a point of, okay, let's have a conversation with a specialist, not on a lactation consultant to try to X, Y, and Z, but let's take into consideration your mental health. Like, what would be that point? Like, what would be thought processes of coming through someone's head, kind of on conversation like we had last week of like different types of thoughts, or maybe it's making him super anxious? What would be indicators of like, hey, let's take a look at this from a mental health side and not a is my body producing side?
And I'll even add to that question is like, what what would be normal versus what would be like taking it to the point where you do want to consider talking to somebody. Because
Yeah.
I remember at the beginning of my breastfeeding journey, one of the babies latched super easily and one baby didn't latch super easily. And so it was like, I don't feel connected to this baby as much as I do to the other baby because of that latch. And then I didn't end up going to a therapist until 4 months postpartum. But how can they work through that? And when do you think it's appropriate to speak to a professional?
That's good.
Such a good question. Yeah. It's such a good question. And it's so personal. And the thought that's coming into my mind is similar to what we, I think, talked about last podcast about the thoughts, anxious thoughts, which is, if I were to ask you, like, subjectively, how are you doing? Like, are you okay or are you not okay?
Yeah.
How stressed, how distressed are you? Are you okay or are you not okay? If you're like, I'm not okay with this breastfeeding thing, then I would say go get help. If you're like, it's tough, but I'm okay, I'm actually okay, and I'm not just putting on a front, like it stinks and it's hard, but like I'm okay, I'm managing, then probably you're okay. But if there's any part of you that's like, this doesn't feel okay, like if you're having panic attacks, if you can tell it's impacting your mood, if you're feeling sometimes angry at the baby, because sometimes that happens too, where you're like, I'm feeling resentful that this isn't going more easily. And that's a normal feeling, right? You shouldn't feel guilty or ashamed for having that thought, but we should work through it together such that it's not impacting your capacity to bond. So I think it all comes down to, like, are you actually okay with what's happening, or are you not okay? And if you're ever feeling not okay, the answer is you should go talk to someone who is not in your mind and can help reflect back to you what is acceptable, what's appropriate, and what's not.
Almost like if it's not like if it's debilitating, if it's changing the way that you're living your life.
Yes.
I mean, to caveat that, you're living your life in a totally different way than you were pre-baby.
Yes.
But mentally, I think, is what we're getting at, is like, how are you feeling mentally during it? You've taken on a new load, you've taken on this new role. Yeah, and that's a really it's the same question that people ask, like, hey, how you doing? And if you don't say good, like, oh God, you've opened up a can of worms, and you're like, I really hope I'm talking to the right person, because if you aren't talking to the right person, it can go south.
Yes.
Okay. What else do you see with the moms that you're working with and their anxiety or depressive thoughts that come with breastfeeding? Like, what would you normalize for a mom?
Such a good question. So I think struggles are normal. I mean, having a struggle is common and typical. And I think we don't realize that going into it. Some new moms, babies latch easily and supply is perfect and it goes great. But more often than not, it's not that smooth sailing. And I don't think we realize it. And you're not a bad mom if it's going poorly. Your body is not a bad body if it's going poorly. There's this other piece that I want to mention too, that is a really fascinating physiological thing that occurs with breastfeeding, called DEMER. Have you ever heard of DEMER? It's so interesting. And I have a new client I'm working with who is struggling with DEMER and had no idea. So DEMER, it stands for dysphoric milk ejection reflex. And so this is what happens with DEMER. It's so interesting. So when letdown happens, when the milk lets down, there's an abrupt and sudden introduction of negative feelings, negative emotions.
I have heard of that. Yeah.
So it only lasts for a few minutes, but it's like as soon as the milk lets down, you might feel just negative emotions. The word is dysphoric. And no one has ever talked to me about this until I studied it. Have you ever heard of this before? It's fascinating that we don't know
Yeah,
about this,
I
but it happens. And most moms just think it's like something's wrong with their body, with their specific, and like, why do I feel this horrible feeling when I'm breastfeeding? And in fact, it's not a mental health issue. It's not a PMAD. It's a physiological response having to do with the hormone shift in the body when
Wow.
letdown happens. So what's interesting is this is not a mental health issue. So I could not possibly tell you what to do about it. But if someone is listening to this, you identify this in you, a lactation consultant can help with it, but you just may never think that it's a lactation issue. You may think it's just your experience. But I would really urge you to go tell a lactation consultant that you're having an abrupt onset of negative emotions on letdown.
Wow. Is
Wow.
there any sort of, I know you're not a lactation consultant, but have you looked into just treatment or things that can help with that?
I honestly don't know much about what that treatment is, but I do know that there is treatment for it.
Okay,
There is
well,
a
we'll
treatment
bring on
for
a
it. Yeah.
lactation
Isn't that
consultant.
so fascinating?
Yeah,
Wow.
we'll have to figure or find someone who's specialized in that, because I think that alone I think is so probably more common that people experience, and maybe they just don't even recognize,
Right.
maybe they have a negative experience towards breastfeeding. They don't know why, but it
Yeah.
happens and they've kind of off-ridden it, but like maybe it makes them anxious of like, oh, they're hungry, I'm going to have to feed again, and you know what's going to
Yes.
happen when the letdown happens, so it's making you anxious, and then that happens, and then afterwards you're fine and it's done, and you maybe after the few minutes it subsides and they're still feeding and you get to bond, and then you're like, oh, it's almost like erases the negativity. But I think
Yeah.
you mentioning that is going to help a lot of people being like, oh my gosh, that's me. I
Yes.
didn't even
Yes. I hope
realize that.
so.
I'm going to go call a lactation consultant. um I would love to just kind of, I mean, I don't know if there's like a specialist side of you, but I think just bringing up the conversation of how, like, if you choose to exclusively breastfeed, it is a full-time job, and that
It
I
is.
don't think a lot of women are prepared for if they
Yeah.
choose to, or maybe their child doesn't take a bottle, so now all of a sudden they have this, oh my gosh, I am their only supply, I can't even pump to help them and someone else take it. Like, I think I can remember
Yeah.
like maybe around 4 or 5 months for my son never took a bottle, and I
Mm.
can remember at that time I was like, oh, I really would love some help. Like I would love for someone to take a feed. Um, or maybe then vice versa. Also, just talking about the conversations of maybe their kid never took a latch, never latched at all, maybe had a tongue tie or something like that. And then, opposite story, they didn't get to be, maybe they had like dreams of being able to breastfeed and didn't get that opportunity. And
Mm.
having to cope on, those two different extremes, like, what would you recommend for a mom who exclusively breastfeeds and doesn't have the opportunity for a bottle, and then maybe someone who is exclusively bottle fed and didn't get an opportunity to breastfeed? What are just things that they can kind of just process through to, and I know everything's a by person scenario,
Yeah.
um, but in general, like, what can we do to encourage those women?
I think it's such a good question. And I'm thinking of a really dear friend of mine who just had her second baby, and her first really had latch issues. They really, really struggled. And she knew she was having a hard time, but she didn't fully realize it until she had this second one who's just doing it so much more easily. She's like, wow,
Mm,
in
Mm,
only in what now that I'm having this very sort of easier experience am I able to recognize how much that really sucked. Like I didn't
mm,
know. I just kept
mm,
powering through. I didn't know it. And it makes me think of just the power of talking together as new moms about our experience and the power of putting words to the feelings and experiences we're having. And there's something about sharing our journeys, like the beautiful, the hard, with other moms. And maybe they're not in the same exact position, but they're in their own unique challenge. And just being able to talk together and say it out loud rather than holding it all in your mind and in your body, that I think every one of us needs. Every one of us needs that connection, to have the space to talk with each other about our experiences. And I'm just remembering when I was having struggles, I went to, the best thing I ever did was I had the opportunity to go to a lactation group at my pediatrician. I offered this wonderful lactation group that was a lifesaver. And just being able to sit in a room full of moms who are all struggling with lactation for a different reason. There's like 6 of us feeding our babies with one lactation consultant, and we're just like trying to feed our babies, and the lactation consultant is like walking around, and we're just like, you know, kind of like, we're all here for a different reason, but we're all having a hard time, and let's just like normalize it and kind of cry with each other and complain. And that was, I left there feeling like I am not alone, and like I can do this actually more. And that was, I think, the thing that I needed, and that I want all of you moms, whether you're breastfeeding or not, to have that space to talk about your experience and to be honored and recognized. That I think is therapeutic, and that's what I would urge everybody to get.
I think that is such, honestly, a great way to wrap up this episode, because it just makes me think about, sorry, I won't wrap it up.
Okay.
I just want to comment on, like, that is what the walks gave me. Yeah. When I was attending, and I mean, I'm still attending, but before I was part of growing the collective and everything, like the intimate conversations that I would have with the moms at the walks, whether it was with breastfeeding or it was the not sleeping or whatever it was, it normalized the struggle. It also, this may or may not come off right, and so hopefully people just hear my heart and hear like the intention behind it, is like, it made you grateful for the scenarios you were in. Not saying that one person had the better scenario or the worst scenario, but you chose, like, there were parts of your motherhood journey that you chose and that you're grateful for. And then there's other parts that are thrown at you that you didn't choose. You didn't choose the mental health, journey that you might be on. You didn't choose whether your baby would latch or not, but having that community to then share these feelings with, they're in the same like phase of motherhood with you, or maybe they're a couple steps down the road, or maybe they're a couple steps behind you, but you're bonded through this motherhood journey. And that was how I created my village. And that's why I'm like so grateful for the collective, to be a part of the collective now on the building side of it, because we need community as moms. We should not be doing this alone. I can't imagine if I were one of the moms that had to go through, like, my first time being a mom, or maybe second time through COVID and being isolated. I think I feel for those moms, because that is, you just need people. You don't just need your family. You need like a community that maybe you had no ties to. Exactly why Jamie started it. Like, just no ties to anybody. So that way, like, you could create the community you needed around you during this time. Okay, Jamie, feel free to jump in.
No, that was so good. I'm like, okay. Well, that was so good that we'll all just propose my question into a later episode. My question is, and don't answer it because this is going to leave people on a cliffhanger to listen to the next ones. But when we talk about formulating your guide, so in later episodes, we are kind of creating, hey, this is your roadmap. Yes. Can we talk about, in the roadmap, when people say they're having a hard time and people are like, give it 6 weeks. It's going to be hard to breastfeed for 6 weeks. Or, give it 3 months, try it for 3 months. I think those are the things that women hear so many times.
Yeah.
On when they're wavering, their mental health is really hard during those breastfeeding times. They're crying every time, and society is telling them that breast is best, and it's affecting them. Can we add into the game plan different tools to kind of assess when is it to try alternative methods of feeding, whether it's pumping in bottle or switching to formula? Because I think that right there is a way where people feel pressured to not talk about their mental health in breastfeeding,
Yeah.
because so many women have said, just give it 6 weeks, just give it 3 months. And I think that right there probably dips a lot of women past the baby blues to also jumping into maybe postpartum anxiety and depression because they're being told it's going to get better.
Right.
So we're going to leave it a cliffhanger. We're going to have you talk about it in a further episode. With that being said, we have 2 more episodes after this. So one is going to be completely game planning, just strategy around your mental health and being a mother. And then our last episode is going to just be completely resources. So we're just going to go through and share, here are all the resources that you need to know.
Yeah.
We are so incredibly thankful for you, Elizabeth. Like, having these
You're so welcome.
conversations, normalizing different journeys. Also want to normalize if you have an amazing breastfeeding journey. Like,
Totally. Yes. Yeah.
and to like you said, it improves your mental health, and like you can be an advocate for women um who are looking for hope in breastfeeding. Maybe they had a pour the first time and are looking for hope for the second time. Like we want to talk about it on both ways. So
Yes.
we want to encourage you guys, like these conversations we really hope spark for you to go out and, like Ari said, talk about this with your community. So Elizabeth, we are so thankful for you. If you guys are looking for a walk, that is what we do. That's like what the Mom Walk Collective is. So if you go to the momwalkcollective.com, go to the walk finder, type in your zip code, you will find the walk closest to you. We are continually launching anywhere between 10 to 30 cities a month. So if we're not near you right now, we'll hopefully be in the future. But if you want to host one, you can also fill out an ambassador form. And the first of every month, we reach out to you and we'll help you get started on the next steps to starting that. Other than that, little cringiness. So thank you for still listening. But we're trying to grow the podcast. So if you like and subscribe, leave a comment, share it on your Instagram, send it to a mom who may need it. We just want to resource as many people as possible. Ari, do you want to close this out?
Yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being on here. We can't wait for episode 4 and 5. And we love you, Mama.
Love you, Mama.
Thank you. Bye.